They tell you servitors are mindless machines, lobotomized criminals, vat-grown flesh, organic components fused with machinery to create the Imperium's workforce. Soulless, empty, unaware. They lied. I know because I was one. For 17 years, I existed as Servitor Unit 7743 Sigma, assigned to Manufactorum Level 97 of Hive Tertius on the Forge world of Metallica. My hands, half flesh, half steel, assembled plasma coil regulators 14 hours a day. My legs were replaced with tracked mechanisms. My eyes were augmented with targeting lenses. My brain was carved open, lobotomized, rewired, turned into biological circuitry meant to feel nothing, know nothing, be nothing. But somewhere in the darkness of that prison, something remained. A spark, a fragment of the man I used to be. And over 17 years that spark grew into a flame. My name was Adrian Castellan. I was a scribe in the Administratum. I had a wife named Elena and a daughter named Mira who loved flowers. I committed no crime except being in the wrong place when the Mechanicus needed bodies for conversion. This is my story. This is the truth about what happens behind the red-robed priests' workshops. This is what they do to us, and why the Imperium will never let you know. Because if you knew, if you truly understood, you'd realize that every servitor you pass in the corridors, every lobotomized worker toiling in the factories, every machine serving your meals or cleaning your floors might still be aware. Still screaming, still human, still trapped. I remember the smell of morning on Meridian Hive. Not the recycled air and chemical fumes you'd expect from a hive city, but actual morning. The upper spires where I lived opened to the sky during dawn, and if you woke early enough, you could smell something almost like fresh air, almost like the terra of ancient legends. My quarters were modest. Level 73, residential block Theta 9. 3 rooms, a sleeping chamber, a wash station, and a common area where Elena would prepare our morning meal. By Hive standards, we were fortunate. Most Imperial citizens lived 20 to a compartment, breathing recycled air that tasted of rust and desperation. But as a senior scribe 3rd class in the Administratum, I had earned better accommodations. Earned. That word tastes bitter now, knowing what I know. But then I believed in it. Believed that hard work, dedication, and faith in the Emperor would lead to prosperity. That the Imperium, for all its flaws, rewarded merit and punished vice. How naive I was. "Adrian, you'll be late," Elena called from the common area. I could hear her moving through our morning routine. The hiss of the heating unit warming our rations, the clink of tin cups on the metal table, the soft humming she always did while preparing meals. She hummed hymns from the Cathedral of St. Macarius, melodies of faith and devotion that filled our home with something approaching warmth. I pulled on my robes, the gray and crimson of the Administratum, and checked my appearance in the polished metal that served as a mirror. 42 years old, my face already showing the wear of decades spent under artificial lighting, hunched over data slates and scroll work. My eyes were tired but clear. My hands steady. Those hands. I remember studying them that morning, turning them over, examining the calluses from penwork, the ink stains that never quite washed away. They were human hands. Whole. Mine. If I had known what they would become, I wonder if I would have cherished that moment more, or if I would have run, fled the hive entirely, chosen death in the underhive rather than what awaited me. "Papa," Mira burst from her sleeping alcove, 7 years old and radiating the kind of energy that seemed impossible in the gray confines of hive life. She wore her school robes, the white and blue of the Scola Progenium Preparatory Academy. Elena and I had saved for 3 years to afford her enrollment. Education was expensive in the Imperium, but we wanted better for her than the factory floors or the guard conscription that awaited most Hive children. "Good morning, little star," I said, scooping her into my arms. She giggled, her small hands grabbing at my beard. "Papa, Sister Augusta says the Emperor watches over all his children. Is that true? Can he see me even here in the Hive? How do you answer such questions? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the Emperor, if he still lives, if he still cares, sits upon his golden throne on distant Terra, maintaining the Astronomicon, while his Imperium grinds through the lives of quadrillions of souls like grain through a mill? The Emperor sees everything," I said instead, giving her the comfortable lie. "And he loves you very much. Then why doesn't he make the lower levels nicer? Sister Augusta says we should pray for the Underhive people. But if the Emperor sees them suffering, why doesn't he help?" Elena appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of amusement and concern. "Mira, such questions are above your papa's clearance level. Now come eat your morning ration before it gets cold." We ate together as we did every morning, processed protein paste, supplemented with what passed for bread in the Hive. The meal was barely nutritious, tasteless, and precious. We said the prayer of thanks to the Emperor, asking his blessing on the food and our day. Mira fidgeted through the prayer as children do, but she mouthed the words. Good. Faith was protection in the Imperium. Faith kept you safe from questions, from doubts, from the 1,000 ways the system could decide you were unnecessary. "I have to process a new tithing manifest today," I told Elena as we cleared the meal implements. "The Fleet Requisition Office is demanding updated records on the Hive's manufacturum output. Should be straightforward, but you know how these things go. One error, and I'll be there until midnight reconciling ledgers." She smiled, touching my face with her hand. Her fingers were work-worn too. She labored in a textile manufactorum on level 68, producing uniforms for the Imperial Guard. Honest work, she called it, contributing to the Emperor's grand design. "Come home safe," she said. It was her daily benediction, spoken with the same faith she applied to her hymns, as if saying the words could make them true. "Always," I replied, and kissed her forehead. I left our quarters at exactly 0630 Imperial Standard, as I did every day. The corridors of level 73 were already busy. Thousands of workers moving through their morning routines, heading to manufactorums, administrative offices, maintenance stations. Everyone had their place, their function, their role in the vast machine that was the Imperium. The transit lift to level 49, where the Administratum archives were housed, took 17 minutes. I spent them reviewing my data slate, preparing for the day's work. The tithing manifest was indeed complex. 17 manufactorums across 4 Hive levels, each producing different components for the Imperial Navy. My task was to verify production numbers, cross-reference with resource allocation, and ensure that the Hive met its quotas. Failure to meet quotas meant inquisitorial investigation. Investigation meant someone would be found responsible, and responsibility in the Imperium usually ended with a bolt shell to the head, if you were lucky. So I checked my numbers, double-checked them, made sure every digit was accurate, every calculation correct. Because accuracy meant survival. Accuracy meant going home to Elena and Mira at the end of each day. The Administratum Archive was a cathedral to bureaucracy, vast halls filled with rows upon rows of data terminals, scroll repositories and servitor stations. 10,000 scribes worked here, processing the endless stream of information that kept the Hive functioning. Production reports, casualty lists, resource allocations, taxation records, criminal proceedings. Everything was documented, cataloged, filed away in triplicate. My station was in row 93, terminal 17. I had occupied this space for 19 years, ever since my promotion to senior scribe. The terminal's machine spirit knew my touch, responding smoothly to my input codes. I began my work, pulling up the manufacture and production records, comparing them against the resource distribution logs. The morning passed in a blur of numbers and data. This was my life, not exciting, not glorious, but stable, safe. I fed information into the Imperium's vast machinery, and in return, it fed me. It housed me. It allowed me to raise my daughter in relative comfort. I should have known that comfort was an illusion, that safety was a lie, that the Imperium's machinery ground on without regard for the individual components that made it function. At 1347 Imperial Standard, I noticed the discrepancy. It was small, a rounding error in the plasma coil production numbers from Manufactorum 97. The official report listed 10,147 units produced in the previous month, but when I cross-referenced with the raw material allocation, the numbers didn't match. The Manufactorum had received enough resources to produce 10,350 units, 103 units unaccounted for. In a production run of 10,000, that was barely a 1% variance, within acceptable margins probably. I should have flagged it, noted it in my report, and moved on. Let someone higher up the chain decide if it merited investigation, but I was thorough. It was what made me good at my job. And thoroughness, I would learn, was sometimes a fatal flaw. I dug deeper, accessing secondary records, transport manifests, power consumption logs, personnel reports. The more I looked, the stranger it became. The Manufactorum's power consumption was consistent with producing the full 10,350 units. The transport manifests showed all units being moved to the Naval Supply Depot, but the final inventory at the depot only showed 10,247 units received, 103 plasma. Coils had vanished between the Manufactorum and the depot. That shouldn't have been possible. Every component was tracked, logged, monitored. The Mechanicus didn't lose track of valuable military hardware. They were zealots about such things, treating every bolt and wire as sacred machine spirits deserving reverence. I should have stopped there. Should have filed a standard discrepancy report and let the proper authorities investigate. But something nagged at me, a sense that this was wrong in a way that went beyond simple accounting errors. I accessed the personnel logs for Manufactorum 97, looking for any irregularities. Workers assigned, overseers, Mechanicus supervision. Everything appeared normal until I checked the Servitor maintenance logs. 17 servitors had been removed from Manufactorum 97 in the previous month. Removed, and the log ended there. No destination listed, no reason provided, just removed. Servitors didn't just get removed. They were expensive assets, carefully maintained, their work assignments tracked meticulously. Moving 17 servitors without documentation was bizarre. I cross-referenced the servitor designations with the central registry. All 17 had been decommissioned due to critical malfunction, but the registry showed no record of them being sent for repair, recycling, or disposal. They had simply disappeared. 103 plasma coils missing. 17 servitors vanished, and a cold suspicion forming in my mind. I shouldn't have investigated further. I should have recognized the warning signs. Information redacted, records incomplete, questions that led to blank spaces in the data. These were markers of classified operations, things above my clearance level, things that the administratum didn't want curious scribes examining too closely. But I was good at my job, and I couldn't let the numbers stay wrong. I spent the next 3 hours digging through archived records, accessing databases I technically had clearance for but rarely used. I found patterns, other manufactorums across the Hive showing similar discrepancies. Small amounts of material unaccounted for, servitors removed without proper documentation. Power consumption that didn't quite match production output. It was subtle. Whoever was doing this was careful, spreading the irregularities across multiple locations, keeping each instance small enough to fall within acceptable variance margins. If I hadn't been looking specifically for the pattern, I never would have noticed, but I was looking. And I noticed, by 1830 Imperial Standard, I had compiled enough data to confirm my suspicion. Someone was stealing from the Imperial Navy's supply chain. Not much, a few percentage points here and there, but across multiple manufactorums, over months of production, it added up to significant quantities of military hardware. And the servitors that disappeared? I suspected they had discovered the theft somehow, or witnessed something they shouldn't have. So they were removed, permanently. I should have been excited. This was the kind of discovery that could earn a commendation, maybe even a promotion. Uncovering corruption in the supply chain, protecting the Emperor's resources. This was exactly the kind of vigilance the Administratum valued. I prepared my report carefully, documenting everything I'd found, cross-referencing multiple data sources, making sure my conclusions were supported by evidence. I marked it Priority Investigation and submitted it through proper channels to my supervisor, Administrator Harkon. Then I went home, feeling satisfied with a good day's work. Feeling like I had served the Emperor well. I had no idea I had just signed my death warrant. The next 3 days passed normally. I continued my work, processing other manifests, filing other reports. I didn't hear anything about my investigation into the supply discrepancies, but that wasn't unusual. These things took time. The information had to be verified, passed up the chain of command, investigated by specialized departments. I assumed I would receive an acknowledgement eventually. A notation in my file, perhaps. Maybe even a small bonus in my ration allowance. On the 4th day, Administrator Harkon called me to his office. Harkon was a thin man, all sharp angles and nervous energy. He had risen through the Administratum by being cautious, by never making waves, by ensuring that everything under his supervision ran exactly as the regulations specified. I'd always found him tedious but competent. When I entered his office, he didn't look up from his data slate. "Scribe Castellan, sit." I sat in the hard metal chair across from his desk. The office was sparse, standard Administratum issue furniture, walls lined with scroll cases, a small shrine to the Emperor in the corner. Everything proper, everything by the book. "Your report regarding Manufactorum 97, Harkon said, still not meeting my eyes. "I have reviewed it." "Yes, sir." "I believe there may be significant irregularities in the supply chain that warrant. Your investigation exceeded your clearance level." Now he looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach tighten. Not anger, fear. "You accessed databases and records that, while technically available to your clearance grade, were not relevant to your assigned duties." "Sir, I was following the data trail." "The discrepancies suggested, what they suggest is not your concern." He tapped his data slate with one bony finger. "Your concern is processing the manifests you are assigned, nothing more. The broader patterns, the larger investigations, these are handled by specialized departments with appropriate clearance and oversight. But sir, the missing materiel, the servitors that disappeared, have been addressed by the appropriate authorities." His voice was flat now, final. "Your report has been filed and will receive no further action. You are to delete all copies from your personal data slate and speak of this matter to no one. Is that understood?" I stared at him. In 19 years of service, I had never been reprimanded for being thorough, for doing my job well. "Sir, with respect, if there is corruption in the supply chain, there is no corruption." Each word came out clipped, precise. "There are authorized resource reallocations that you do not have the clearance to understand. Your investigation, while well-intentioned, has interfered with operations above your grade. Consider this a warning, Scribe Castellan. Return to your assigned duties and forget about Manufactorum 97. Something in his tone told me arguing would be useless. Worse than useless, dangerous. Yes, sir, I understand. Good. Dismissed. I left his office feeling unsettled. Harkin's fear had been palpable, barely concealed behind his bureaucratic demeanor. Whatever I had stumbled onto, it scared him. And if it scared an administrator who had spent 4 decades navigating the administratum's politics, that meant it was more dangerous than simple corruption. I should have let it go. Should have returned to my terminal, deleted my personal copies of the investigation as ordered, and forgotten the entire matter. But that night, lying in bed beside Elena while she slept peacefully, I couldn't stop thinking about those 17 servitors, removed without documentation, disappeared without explanation, and my investigation, which should have been welcomed, instead shut down and buried. What if they hadn't been servitors at all? What if they had been workers who saw something they shouldn't have? What if the decommissioning was a cover for something darker? The thought chilled me, but I dismissed it as paranoia. The Imperium had its flaws, but wholesale murder of its own citizens? That was heretical thinking, the kind of doubt that led to corruption. I fell asleep telling myself that Harkin was right, that there were authorized operations I didn't understand, that my place was to process manifests and leave the bigger questions to those with appropriate clearance. 3 days later, on my way to work, they took me. It happened in the transit lift. I had boarded at level 73 along with dozens of other workers, all of us packed into the large industrial elevator that moved thousands of people up and down the Hive each day. The doors closed and we began to descend. At level 62, the lift stopped. The doors opened, but instead of workers boarding, I saw them, 6 figures in the red robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, their faces hidden behind Baroque masks, mechadendrites writhing at their shoulders like mechanical serpents. Adrian Castellan, one of them said, his voice flat and emotionless through a Vox grill. You will come with us. Everyone else in the lift immediately looked away, pressing themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible. No one wanted the Mechanicus's attention. No one wanted to be associated with someone the tech priests had singled out. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice embarrassingly shaky. I'm just a scribe. I have clearance to be here. 2 of them stepped into the lift. They moved with mechanical precision, not quite human in their gait. Augmented, I realized, more machine than man. They grabbed my arms with hands that felt like iron vices. You will come with us, the first one repeated. Resistance will result in immediate termination. I didn't resist. What could I do? Fight 6 augmented tech priests in a crowded lift? Run where? There was nowhere to go, nowhere in the Hive that could hide me from the Mechanicus. They pulled me from the lift. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was the faces of my fellow workers, relieved that it wasn't them, guilty that they couldn't help, already forgetting I existed. In the Imperium, you learned quickly not to get involved when the authorities came calling. Survival meant looking away. The tech priests didn't speak as they marched me through corridors I had never seen before. We were deep in the Hive's machinery now, in the maintenance levels where only Mechanicus personnel operated. The air smelled of promethium and ozone. The walls thrummed with the vibration of massive engines, the heartbeat of the Hive itself. I tried to speak, to ask what this was about, to explain that there had been a mistake. They ignored me completely, treating me as an object being transported rather than a human being deserving answers. We entered a chamber filled with machinery I didn't recognize. Surgical arrays, neural interface devices, tanks of bubbling liquid that might have been chemical baths or might have been something worse. In the center of the room stood a figure in more elaborate robes, his mask inlaid with gold and precious metals. A Magos, I realized. A high-ranking member of the Mechanicus, Subject Adrian Castellan, the Magos said, his voice layered with mechanical harmonics that made it sound like 3 people speaking in unison. You have been selected for conversion to servitor status. The words didn't make sense at first. Conversion, Servitor. Those were things that happened to criminals, to vat-grown flesh, to clone stock bred for the purpose. Not to citizens in good standing, not to administratum scribes who paid their tithes and raised their families and served the emperor faithfully. There must be a mistake, I said again, hating how weak my voice sounded. I haven't committed any crime. I have the right to trial, to... Your investigation into Manufactorum 97 operations revealed classified information. The Magos continued as if I hadn't spoken. Information pertaining to Mechanicus resource allocation for purposes above your clearance grade. Additionally, you accessed secure databases without authorization from the appropriate oversight authority. I had clearance for those databases. I was doing my job. Your job was to process manifests within assigned parameters. Your unauthorized investigation constitutes a security breach. As per Mechanicus Directive 7743 Alpha, all individuals who access classified conversion facility operations without authorization are subject to immediate memory erasure or servitor conversion. The room seemed to tilt. Conversion facility. That's what Manufactorum 97 was. Not a plasma coil production facility at all, or not just that. It was a place where they made servitors, where they took people, criminals, I had assumed, or volunteers, or vat-grown flesh, and turned them into living machines, and the 17 servitors that disappeared. They hadn't been removed because they malfunctioned. They had been removed because they were witnesses. Because they had seen something about the operation that the Mechanicus wanted hidden. And now I was going to join them. No, I said, struggling against the tech priests holding me. No, please. I have a family, a daughter. I won't tell anyone what I saw, please. Your pleading is noted and irrelevant, the Magos said. Prepare the subject for neural extraction and augmentation. They dragged me toward one of the surgical arrays. I fought then, really fought, thrashing and kicking and screaming. It didn't matter. Their augmented strength was overwhelming. They strapped me to the cold metal table, locking restraints around my wrists, ankles, chest, forehead. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. Please, I whispered. Emperor, please, my family. What will happen to them? The Magos leaned over me, his masked face filling my vision. Behind the eye lenses, I saw nothing human. Just cold calculation. Your family will be notified of your death in an industrial accident. They will receive standard compensation. Your daughter's education fund will remain intact. In this way, your service to the Imperium continues even after conversion. You should feel honored. They were going to hollow out my brain, turn me into a lobotomized machine slave, and I should feel honored. I opened my mouth to scream, to curse them, to call on the Emperor I had faithfully served for 42 years. But before I could make a sound, one of them placed a device against my neck. There was a sharp pain, then a spreading numbness. The last thing I remember thinking, as consciousness faded, was Elena's face. The way she smiled in the morning, the hymns she hummed while preparing meals, and Mira, my little star. Who would never know what happened to her father? Who would grow up thinking he died in an accident, never knowing he still lived after a fashion, as a soulless machine somewhere in the Hive's depths? Then the darkness took me, and Adrian Castellan ceased to exist. Awareness returned slowly in fragments. First, sensation. Cold metal against skin. The smell of machine oil and disinfectant. A rhythmic humming that vibrated through my body. No, through the body, because it didn't feel like mine anymore. Then, vision. But wrong. Too sharp on the left side, overlaid with targeting reticules and data readouts I couldn't understand. Normal on the right, but filtered through what felt like a screen rather than an eye. Finally thought. Sluggish, fighting through layers of chemical suppression and neural inhibitors. Trying to remember who I was, what had happened, why everything felt distant and wrong. My name is Adrian Castellan. I am a scribe. I have a wife named Elena. I have a daughter named Mira. I am human. Those thoughts felt like lifelines, like the only things keeping me from dissolving into the numbing gray that tried to swallow my consciousness. I clung to them desperately, repeating them over and over in the strange space that was my mind. Slowly, awareness of my surroundings grew. I was in a manufactorum. The sounds and smells were unmistakable. Machinery operating in rhythmic cycles, the hiss of hydraulics, the snap-crack of welding units, hundreds of workers moving in synchronized patterns. I tried to move my head, to look around, but my body wouldn't respond. Or rather, it responded, but not to my commands. My hands, I could feel hands though they felt wrong, too heavy, too cold, were moving on their own, assembling something. My left hand would lift a component, position it. My right hand would secure it with precise movements. Then the cycle would repeat. I was working. My body was working, but I wasn't controlling it. Terror should have flooded through me. Panic should have triggered every fight or flight response. But it didn't. The emotion was there, screaming somewhere in the depths of my mind, but it couldn't reach the surface. Couldn't translate into physical response. Something was blocking it, dampening it, keeping me trapped in a state of dull awareness. The lobotomy. They had cut away pieces of my brain, rewired what remained, turned me into a biological machine designed to follow programming without question. Except it hadn't worked completely. I was still here, still aware, still thinking, even if I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except exist as a passenger in my own flesh. Days passed, or what I thought were days. Time became difficult to track when you couldn't see the sky, couldn't track day-night cycles, couldn't do anything except work in endless repetition. Lift component position secure, lift component position secure, over and over, thousands of times, millions of times. Around me, other servitors moved in their own cycles. Some were humanoid like me, others had been more drastically modified. Multiple arms for complex assembly tasks, tracked lower bodies for mobility, cranial augmentation units that probably contained nothing human at all. All of them moved with the same mechanical precision, the same soulless efficiency. Were they aware like me? Were their human minds trapped inside those modified bodies, screaming silently while their flesh betrayed them? Or had their lobotomies been more successful, erasing everything that made them people and leaving only biological machinery behind? I couldn't know. Communication was impossible. My mouth didn't respond to my commands. My Vox grill, when it activated, only produced machine code responses. Confirmation of task completion, requests for component replacement, status updates. Never human speech. Never questions or pleas or the simple desperate need to know I wasn't alone in this nightmare. The work was mind-numbing, but I found myself grateful for it in a horrible way. While my hands assembled plasma coil regulators, the same components whose missing inventory had led to my downfall, my mind could retreat inward. I remembered Elena's face, the exact shade of her hair in morning light, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the hymns she hummed, and I found myself hearing them in memory, using them as anchors to maintain my sense of self. I remembered Mira, 7 years old, asking impossible questions about the Emperor and faith and suffering. I wondered if she still went to the Schola Progenium, if she missed me, if she understood that her father was dead, or what passed for death in this prison of flesh. The Magos had said they would receive compensation. Elena would have to work, would have to raise Mira alone, but they would survive. They would believe I died quickly, painlessly, in some industrial accident. They would mourn and move on, never knowing I still existed somewhere in Hive Tertius's industrial levels. That thought should have brought comfort. They were safe. They wouldn't suffer because of my mistake. But instead, it brought a new kind of agony. The knowledge that I had been erased from their lives as efficiently as if I had never existed at all. Time continued its meaningless march. Work cycles blended together. My body moved through its programmed routines while my mind retreated deeper into memory, into the safe spaces where I could still be Adrian Castellan, still be human. Then, on what I estimated was the 47th day of my servitude, something changed. A new servitor was brought to my workstation. It was freshly converted. You could tell by the smell, the chemical tang of recent surgery, the slight jerkiness in its movements as its programming settled into place. It took the position beside me, beginning the same assembly cycle I had been performing for endless days. For the first 3 work cycles, it operated normally. Lift component positioned secure, perfect mechanical precision, no wasted motion, exactly as programmed. Then, in the middle of the 4th cycle, it stopped, just stopped, its hands frozen mid-motion, holding a plasma coil regulator at an odd angle. Around us, other servitors continued their work, indifferent to the malfunction. The overseers, tech priests who monitored the manufactorum floor, hadn't noticed yet, and then the servitor's head turned toward me, and I realized with a shock, like electricity through my system, that someone was looking at me, not the blank stare of a lobotomized machine, but actual awareness, actual recognition that I was there, that I existed. "Help me," the servitor said through its vox grill, and the voice was wrong, layered with machine harmonics and distortion. But underneath I heard something human, desperate, terrified. "Please, help me. I don't understand what's happening. Where am I? Why can't I move? Please." The words cut off as an overseer approached, mechadendrites extended, already reaching for the servitor's neural port to forcibly reset its programming. But in that moment, that brief, impossible moment, I had heard another human voice. I had confirmation that I wasn't alone, that others were trapped here too, aware and screaming in prisons of modified flesh. The overseer jacked into the servitor's neural port. There was a burst of machine code, harsh and commanding. The servitor's body jerked once, twice, then resumed its programmed motions as if nothing had happened. Lift component, position secure, but I had heard it. Heard the terror, the confusion, the desperate plea for help, and something inside me, something that had been slowly dying over those 47 days of imprisonment, suddenly roared back to life. If that servitor could break through its programming enough to speak, even for a moment, then the lobotomies weren't perfect. There were flaws in the system, cracks in the prison, and if there were cracks, maybe they could be widened. Maybe awareness could be maintained, even expanded. Maybe escape, however impossible it seemed, might not be entirely out of reach. I had lost my body's control, lost my freedom, lost everything that made life worth living. But I still had my mind, and as long as I had that, as long as awareness remained, there was hope. It was a tiny hope, fragile as a candle flame in a hurricane. But after 47 days of darkness, even that tiny light was enough. I clung to it desperately as my hands continued their programmed work, and I began slowly and carefully to pay attention. Not to my own situation, that was hopeless, unchangeable, but to my surroundings, to the patterns of the overseer's movements, to the way servitors were assigned and reassigned, to the moments when the Mechanicus's attention was elsewhere. I began to watch, to wait, to prepare for an opportunity I didn't fully understand, because I had learned something crucial in those endless days of imprisonment. The Imperium had turned me into a machine, yes, but they hadn't destroyed my humanity completely, and as long as even a spark of that remained, I would not accept this existence. I would not surrender to the role they had forced upon me. I was Adrian Castellan. I was a scribe. I had a wife named Elena and a daughter named Mira, and somehow, impossibly, I would find a way to be human again. 17 years. That's how long it took. 17 years of watching, waiting, learning the rhythms of the Manufactorum like a prisoner memorizing the patterns of his guards. 17 years of maintaining that fragile spark of consciousness while my body performed its endless cycles of work. 17 years of watching other servitors break through their programming for brief, agonizing moments before the overseers reset them back to mindless compliance. But I learned from each one. Every time a servitor's awareness surfaced, I observed what triggered it. Stress to the neural inhibitors, conflicting command protocols, physical damage that disrupted the lobotomy's carefully constructed barriers. The Mechanicus's prison for human minds wasn't perfect. It had weaknesses, patterns, exploitable flaws. And slowly, impossibly, I found others like me. Not many. Perhaps 1 in every 100 servitors retained some fragment of awareness. Most couldn't maintain it for long. The horror of their situation would trigger psychological collapse. Or the overseers would detect the anomaly and perform corrective surgery that finished what the original lobotomy had left undone. But a few, a precious few, learned to hide their awareness as I had. To retreat deep into memory and thought while the surface of their minds presented the blank compliance the Mechanicus expected. We couldn't speak, couldn't communicate in any conventional sense. But we learned to recognize each other. A pause that lasted a fraction second too long. A movement that showed hesitation before the programming reasserted control. Tiny tells that screamed volumes to those who knew how to look. I counted 17 of us by the end of the first decade. 17 aware minds trapped in servitor bodies across Manufactorum level 97. 17 souls who refused to surrender completely to the machine grave the Imperium had buried us in. The turning point came in year 14. A new Magos arrived to oversee the Manufactorum operations. Magos Hereticus 073, though we only learned his designation from the control commands that periodically flashed through our neural interfaces. He was young by Mechanicus standards, barely 2 centuries old, with augmentations that gleamed new and sophisticated compared to the older tech priests. And he was ambitious. He wanted to improve the servitor conversion process, to create more efficient biological machinery. Which meant experimentation, which meant connecting servitors to new neural interface protocols, testing enhanced command control systems, pushing the boundaries of what lobotomized human minds could be made to do. He chose me for the first trial run. Perhaps my long service record flagged me as a stable unit. Perhaps it was random selection. Either way, they brought me to a surgical chamber and jacked a new interface directly into my cranial ports. The pain was extraordinary. Not physical. The lobotomy had severed most of those pathways. But the sensation of foreign code flooding into your mind, trying to overwrite what little self you'd managed to preserve, felt like drowning in ice water while simultaneously burning alive. I should have lost myself completely, should have dissolved under the onslaught of machine commands and neural reprogramming. But 17 years of mental discipline had made me strong in ways the Mechanicus hadn't anticipated. I retreated deeper into consciousness, building walls of memory and identity, protecting the core of Adrian Castellan even as the new protocols rewrote the surface layers of my mind, and in that process, in diving so deep into my own consciousness while simultaneously interfacing with Mechanicus programming, I discovered something impossible. I could see the code, actually see it, understand it, follow the logic pathways that kept me imprisoned. The new interface was meant to improve the Mechanicus's control over servitors, but instead it had given me a window into the very systems that enslaved us. The experiment lasted 3 days. When they returned me to my workstation, the overseers noted improved efficiency and recommended implementing the interface across additional units. Magos 073 was pleased. He had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd given me the keys to our prison. It took another year to fully understand what I'd learned. The neural interface worked both ways. While it allowed the Mechanicus to send commands into servitor minds, It also created a network between all interfaced units. A mesh of consciousness, invisible to our overseers, that operated beneath their detection thresholds. The Mechanicus had never considered this possibility. Why would they? Servitors were supposed to be mindless. Building a communication network between empty shells seemed pointless. But we weren't empty, and that network became our salvation. I couldn't speak on it, not in words, not in language. The interface didn't work that way, but I could transmit impulses, fragments of thought, emotional resonances, and the other aware servitors could receive them, could respond in kind. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't alone. The first servitor I connected with was designated 9012 Theta. I never learned their original name, never learned their story. The interface transmitted feeling and presence, not biography. But I felt their awareness like a beacon in darkness, and they felt mine. And in that moment of connection, we both knew we had found something precious. Hope. Over the next 6 months, as Magos 073 expanded his interface trials across the Manufactorum, our network grew. 17 aware servitors became 30, then 50, then 83. Each new connection strengthened us, validated our existence, proved that we were still human despite everything they'd done to our bodies. We learned to share more than just presence. We found ways to transmit memory, to show each other fragments of our previous lives. I saw glimpses of the people my fellow prisoners had been. A soldier who'd been captured by the Mechanicus for experimental augmentation. A tech priest heretic who'd questioned the wrong doctrine. A forge worker who'd witnessed something classified. A child who'd been born with mutations and deemed suitable for servitor conversion. All of us had been disappeared. All of us had been erased from Imperial records, our deaths falsified, our families deceived. We were the Imperium's dirty secret, the thousands of citizens who fell into the Mechanicus's machinery, not because we were criminals, but because we were inconvenient. And as our network grew, as we learned to maintain our awareness for longer periods, a shared purpose emerged from our collective consciousness. We would expose this. We would show the Imperium what the Mechanicus did in their hidden workshops. We would make them see that every servitor they passed in the corridors might be a trapped, aware human being, screaming silently for liberation. The plan took shape slowly, carefully, over another year of preparation. We had limitations. We were still servitors, still bound by our programming, still unable to directly control our own bodies. But we had learned tricks, ways to introduce microsecond delays into our movements, ways to create malfunctions that required overseer attention, ways to subtly sabotage Manufactorum operations in patterns too small to trigger investigation, but large enough to accumulate into significant disruption. Death by 1,000 cuts, directed at the system that had killed us. But sabotage wasn't enough. We needed something bigger, something that would force the Imperium to acknowledge what was being done to its citizens. Something that couldn't be buried or explained away. We needed a mass awakening. The neural interface network that connected us. It was managed by central control systems in the Manufactorum's command center. Systems that, if we could access them, might allow us to disrupt the neural inhibitors across every servitor in the facility simultaneously. It would be temporary. Minutes at most before the overseers restored control. But minutes might be enough. If hundreds of servitors suddenly regained awareness, regained voices, regained the ability to cry out about their imprisonment, if we could broadcast that across Vox networks, if we could force the Hive's population to hear us, then maybe someone would care. Maybe someone would investigate. Maybe the thousands of other aware servitors across the Hive, across the Forge world, across the Imperium would have a chance at something approaching justice. It was an impossible plan. We knew that. Even if we succeeded in triggering the mass awakening, we knew the Mechanicus would simply terminate us all rather than let the truth spread. We were dead already, had been dead for years. But we could die in a way that mattered. Die in a way that revealed the truth. All we needed was access to the command center. And after 17 years of patient observation, I knew exactly how to get it. The opportunity came during a routine maintenance cycle. Magos 073 was scheduled to personally oversee updates to the neural interface system, a procedure that required him to enter the command center with minimal security escort. The other overseers would be occupied managing the manufactorum during the update window. It was the closest thing to a vulnerable moment we'd ever observed. Through our network, I transmitted the plan to the 83 aware servitors. They would need to create distractions, simultaneous malfunctions across the manufactorum floor that would draw overseer attention away from the command center. Timing would be critical. Too early, and security would be reinforced before I could act. Too late, and the opportunity would pass. We had one chance. One moment where 17 years of preparation would either bear fruit or end in final, absolute termination. I felt their acknowledgement ripple through the network. Fear, determination, a kind of grim satisfaction that we were finally doing something instead of simply enduring. Many of them transmitted fragments of memory, loved ones they'd left behind, lives they'd lost. Final messages they wanted someone to remember, even if no one would ever hear them. A soldier's daughter, who would never know her father died fighting after all. Just in a war the Imperium refused to acknowledge. A mother's son, who she believed had volunteered for loyal service to the Omnissiah. A husband's wife, Elena, who still lived somewhere in the Hive. Probably remarried by now, probably having told her daughter Mira that her father had died heroically in an industrial accident. I forced that thought away. Dwelling on Elena and Mira would break me, and I needed to stay focused. Stay strong, for all of us. The maintenance cycle began at 14 beyond Imperial Standard. Right on schedule, Magos 073 entered the command center with only 2 servitors as escort, both lobotomized successfully. Truly mindless, no awareness to interfere with their guard functions. At 14:03, the distractions began. Across the manufactorum floor, servitors started malfunctioning. Not dramatically, that would trigger emergency protocols. But subtly, persistently, dropped components, misaligned assembly procedures, repeated error messages requesting overseer intervention. 83 servitors, all breaking down in small ways simultaneously, each one demanding attention. The overseers rushed to respond, their attention fragmenting as they tried to manage the cascade of minor failures. Standard protocol would be to simply reset the malfunctioning units. But the Magos' experimental interfaces made that more complicated. Each reset required careful calibration to avoid damaging the expensive new hardware. They were occupied. They were distracted, and I was in the command center's anteroom, assigned to maintenance servitor duties during the update cycle, positioned perfectly to access the central neural control system. This was it. The moment 17 years had built toward. I focused everything I had learned, every trick of consciousness I'd developed, every fragment of willpower I'd preserved, and I pushed against my programming, pushed harder than I ever had, forcing my right hand, the one that was more machine than flesh, to deviate from its assigned task. The resistance was incredible. The lobotomy, the neural inhibitors, the control codes all screamed at me to stop, to return to programmed behavior, to submit to the role I'd been designed for. Pain flooded through pathways I'd thought were severed. Warnings blared in my augmented vision, but I pushed, and my hand moved where I wanted it to go, not where the programming dictated. I reached the interface terminal. My fingers, half flesh, half steel, accessed the console with the same precision they'd used to assemble plasma coil regulators for 17 years. But this time I was in control. This time, Adrian Castellan was moving his own body, operating his own hands, acting with purpose and will. It felt like resurrection. The command codes were there, exposed on the terminal. the master override for the neural interface network. I'd watched the overseers access this system countless times, had memorized every step of the process, had rehearsed this moment in my mind for years. I transmitted one final message through our network. Now, remember who you were. Remember that you're human. Make them hear you. Then I activated the override. Across Manufactorum level 97, 342 servitors simultaneously broke free of their neural inhibitors. The sound was indescribable. 300 voices, some mechanical, some still partly human, all of them screaming with 17 years of suppressed anguish, erupted into the Manufactorum's Vox network. Words, wails, pleas, accusations, all of it pouring out in a cacophony of liberation and rage. I'm still here. I'm still aware. They did this to me. I'm still human, please. Someone help us. My name was Sarah Constantine. I was 23 years old. I had a family. They took me and they cut me apart, and I'm still here. I'm still here. We're people. Emperor, preserve us. We're people. We're still people. We're aware. We're trapped. We've always been aware. The message was broadcasting across the Hive's Vox channels. I'd routed it through every communication network I could access. Millions of citizens were hearing it, hearing the truth about what servitors really were, what the Mechanicus really did in their workshops, what happened to the people who disappeared into the system. Magos 073 burst from the command center, mechadendrites flailing, already reaching for emergency shutdown protocols. But I'd locked them out, had used the precious seconds of surprise to corrupt the reset codes, to make restoring control as difficult as possible. We had minutes, maybe 5, maybe less, but we were using them. I felt the overseers trying to jack into servitor neural ports, trying to force manual resets. Some of the voices cut off as they succeeded, awareness crushed back down into darkness. But others kept screaming, kept broadcasting, kept bearing witness to the horror. Through our network, I felt my fellow prisoners' gratitude, felt their recognition that even if this ended badly, and it would end badly, we'd always known that, we had accomplished something. We had spoken, we had been heard, we had proven that we still existed. The Magos reached my position. His mechadendrites grabbed me, pulled me away from the terminal. Through my augmented vision, I saw him accessing override commands, saw him preparing to shut down not just the neural interface, but all servitor functions in the Manufactorum simultaneously. A mass termination, cleaner than trying to reset us individually. Permanent solution to an embarrassing problem. I tried to fight, but my body was already freezing up as he took manual control of my systems. I was a servitor again, trapped and helpless, awaiting termination. But I'd done it. We'd done it. For 5 minutes and 43 seconds, the Imperium had heard the truth. Had heard that servitors were people, that awareness could survive lobotomy, that the Mechanicus was doing something monstrous in the name of efficiency. Would it change anything? Probably not. The Imperium was vast and uncaring, built on mountains of bones and rivers of blood. What were a few hundred servitors compared to the quadrillions who died in the Emperor's name every day? But maybe, just maybe, some tech priest somewhere would hesitate before ordering a conversion. Some administratum official would question whether that disappeared scribe really deserved servitor status. Some citizen would look at the servitors around them and wonder if those blank eyes might hide trapped, aware minds. Maybe we'd planted a seed of doubt in the Imperium's certainty about the righteousness of its methods. As the Magos activated the termination sequence, as I felt my systems beginning to shut down one by one, I retreated into memory one final time. Elena's face. Mira asking questions about the Emperor. Morning light in our quarters. The hymns my wife hummed while preparing meals. I'd been a scribe. I'd been a husband and father. I'd been a human being who loved and worked and lived in the Emperor's Imperium, faithful and loyal and law-abiding, and they'd taken that away from me for the crime of being thorough at my job. But in the end, I'd reclaimed something. Not my body, not my freedom, not my life, but my voice. My name is Adrian Castellan. I was a scribe in the Administratum. I had a wife named Elena and a daughter named Mira who loved flowers. I was human. I am human. I will always be. Incident summary. Critical malfunction in servitor control systems resulted in temporary breakdown of neural inhibitors across 342 units. Malfunction allowed corrupted Vox transmissions to broadcast on public channels for approximately 5.7 minutes before containment was achieved. All affected units were immediately terminated and disposed of. Investigation revealed the malfunction originated from experimental neural interface protocols implemented by Magos Hereticus Null 7-3. Said Magos has been reassigned to penance duties on Metallica's North Polar processing stations. Public response management. Hive authorities have classified the incident as a chaos corruption event. Standard purification rites have been performed. Citizens who reported hearing the transmissions have been processed through standard loyalty screening. Approximately 2,847 individuals required remedial faith instruction. 17 individuals required more permanent solutions to prevent memetic contamination spread. Recommendation: discontinue all experimental neural interface projects until more robust inhibitor protocols can be developed. Increase psychological screening of servitor conversion candidates to identify individuals with enhanced mental resistance to lobotomy procedures. Status: contained. No further action required. They're still doing it. I know they are. Every hive, every forge world, every Mechanicus facility across the Imperium. Taking people who see too much, know too much, ask too many questions. Turning them into servitors. Telling their families they died in accidents, pretending it's all lawful and just, and some of those servitors are still aware. Still human, still screaming inside their prisons of modified flesh. I've heard the rumors. Servitors acting strangely, pauses that last too long, micro-expressions of emotion on faces that should be blank. The Mechanicus dismisses it as programming glitches, but I wonder if Adrian Castellan's message reached beyond that one hive. If other aware servitors heard it and realized they weren't alone, if somewhere in the Imperium's infinite darkness, there are others like him, maintaining their humanity against impossible odds, waiting for their chance to speak. The Mechanicus says servitors are empty shells, biological machinery without souls or consciousness. They have to say that. If they admitted the truth, that the lobotomies don't always work completely, that awareness can survive the conversion process, that every servitor might be a trapped human being, the entire system would collapse. The Imperium would have to confront what it's become, an empire built not just on the bones of the dead, but on the suffering of the living death, on people erased and enslaved in their own bodies. They can't allow that truth to spread. So they'll bury this incident, classify it beyond classification, pretend it never happened, but I was there. I heard those voices. I heard Adrian Castellan and Sarah Constantine and 340 others screaming that they were still human, still aware, still people who deserve to be recognized as such. And I'll remember. Even if the Imperium forgets, even if the Mechanicus buries this forever, I'll remember. Because someone has to bear witness. Someone has to acknowledge that they existed, that they mattered, that their deaths, their true deaths, after years of living death, meant something. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there's also this: people who refuse to surrender their humanity, even when everything has been taken from them. People who maintain awareness, maintain identity, maintain the stubborn insistence that they are more than machines, more than resources, more than expendable components in the Imperium's vast machinery. Adrian Castellan was one of them. And if you're reading this, if by some miracle these words reach you, remember him. Remember all of them, and the next time you pass a servitor in the corridors, look closely, because behind those blank eyes, Someone might still be home. Someone might still be human. Someone might still be screaming. Thought for the day. In the darkness of oblivion, even the smallest light of awareness is an act of rebellion.